Ever notice how you just can't help but tap your foot along to a catchy beat?
Just like an instinct, right?
Totally. Rhythm, it's everywhere. But have you ever stopped to think about how it actually works? Like what makes it tick?
It's one of those things we experience all the time, but don't always think about too deeply.
Exactly. So today, we're taking a deep dive into the world of rhythm.
And to help us unpack it all, we're joined by Jack Lima.
A musician who's on this really fascinating quest. He wants to map out all possible rhythms, kind of like creating a rhythmic dictionary.
A dictionary of rhythm. That's a cool way to put it. But there's a fascinating twist.
Oh, tell me more.
Well, Lima, he sees rhythm as its own language, a mathematical one at that. He explored this idea in his book Dicionário de Ritmo, and he even created some software to go along with it.
Okay, a mathematical language for rhythm. Now that's something I got to hear more about.
Hmm.
So how does this musical mathematician, how does he see rhythm differently from, let's say, the average person tapping their foot on the street?
He uses a brilliant analogy. He says, imagine rhythm as a container.
A container.
Yeah. And the musical notes, those are the ingredients that go inside.
Okay, I think I see where you're going with this.
Like think of baking a cake.
Yeah.
You don't just grab ingredients and toss them randomly into a bowl and hope for the best.
Right. There's a recipe, a method to the madness.
Exactly. You need that recipe to tell you how much of each ingredient to use, how they all work together, right?
Yeah, and how long to bake it for, at what temperature?
Yeah. And in music, that recipe, that's the rhythm. It sets the stage, the structure, before you even play a single note. It dictates what can and can't happen musically within its boundaries.
So instead of fixating on the notes themselves, Lima wants us to focus on the structure they fit into.
It's like he's saying, yeah, ingredients are important, but have you considered the significance of this very specific cake pan?
I like that.
And not just any cake pan, this very special, like mathematically designed cake pan. He argues that this rhythmic structure that we're talking about, it's all built on this foundation of what's called binary subdivision.
Binary subdivision. Sounds complicated.
It's simpler than it sounds. Essentially, it just means dividing each beat into twos.
Oh, okay. Like when we clap our hands to a beat, 1, 2, 1, 2.
Precisely. That natural instinct to divide a beat into two equal parts, that's binary subdivision in action.
Yeah.
Think of it like musical notation. A whole note gets 4 beats,
Yeah.
a half note gets
Yeah,
2.
right. And then you have quarter notes, eighth notes, 16th notes. It's all based on dividing by 2.
Exactly.
You got it. Okay, that makes sense. But where does the math part come in? Like, does he have a formula for figuring out rhythms? I'm intrigued.
He actually does. Lima, he believes that this binary subdivision thing, it can be expanded on.
Expanded how?
Dividing by 3, by 4, you name it. But there's a limit.
A limit. What do you mean?
Eventually, if you keep subdividing a beat, all those sounds, they start to blend together. Our ears, they can't tell the individual beats apart anymore.
So it's like our brains can only handle so much math before it all just sounds like noise.
Exactly. And that limit, that point where it all blends together, it's different for each musical genre. Lima even uses samba as an example.
Samba, the dance.
Yep. He breaks it down mathematically to show how many rhythmic variations are actually possible within a traditional samba song.
Wait, hold on. So you're telling me that samba has like a mathematical formula? That's wild. Tell me more. How does that work?
Okay, so samba has this mathematical frameworks, this limited set of rhythmic possibilities. But does that mean every samba song is predictable? Where's the room for creativity?
That's where it gets really interesting. Lima found that a traditional samba, with its 2-beat structure and 4 subdivisions, it only has 8 rhythmic possibilities per measure.
Wait, only 8? But samba music is so lively, so full of surprises. How is that possible with just 8 building blocks? Exactly. And that's a testament to the musicians, their skill. They're working within these defined boundaries, but they're always finding these new and exciting ways to combine and recombine those 8 possibilities. It's like a chef, right? Creating a gourmet meal, but they can only use ingredients from their own garden.
Limitations can breed creativity.
Exactly.
So knowing the rules of samba rhythm, it doesn't limit you. It just gives you this deeper understanding of how to play around within those rules. It's like learning the grammar of a language before you start writing poetry with it.
Precisely. And just like learning grammar, it helps you appreciate the nuances of great literature. Understanding the math behind rhythm, it can enhance your appreciation of the music. You start to hear those subtle variations, those unexpected combinations that maybe you would have missed before.
So instead of just like feeling the rhythm, you're starting to understand the mechanics behind it, like seeing the code behind a beautifully designed website.
Exactly.
So This is where Lima's work gets really interesting to me. He argues that traditional music education, it often skips over this fundamental understanding of rhythm, all that focus on memorizing notes and scales.
Yeah.
He thinks we're missing a big piece of the puzzle.
It's like trying to teach someone to write a novel, right? But you don't teach them the alphabet
You'll
first.
just throw them in the deep end and hoping they figure it out.
Exactly. Lima believes that by starting with this underlying mathematical structure of rhythm, we can make music education way more accessible, more effective. Imagine if anyone could learn to compose, to improvise, to truly understand the language of music. It wouldn't matter what their background was or their previous experience.
That's a really powerful thought. Like, instead of just identifying the so-called natural musicians, we might actually be able to nurture that musicality in everyone.
Exactly. And that's where his software comes into play.
Yeah.
Lima sees it as this tool for like rewiring how we think about music, bridging this gap between the intuitive experience of rhythm and those underlying mathematical principles we've been talking about.
So it's not just about creating cool beats, it's about rewiring your brain to think about music in this whole new way. He's almost creating musical architects, not just musicians. But how does the software actually work? Does it like teach you equations instead of scales? Equations instead of scales. Now that's a music class I'd sign up for. But really, how does Lima's software actually work?
It's not quite equations, but it does let you see the musical ideas, visually.
Visually.
Yeah, so you can actually see the patterns and the structures in the rhythms. It's like this digital canvas where you get to build rhythms block by block, experiment with different combinations, and the cool part, you hear the results immediately.
So it's interactive. You're not just passively listening to music. You're messing around with the building blocks, seeing how those mathematical principles we talked about actually become sound.
Exactly.
That's so cool.
And because the software is built on his system, it gives you this consistent framework for understanding rhythm.
Okay, I get it. Like a universal language, but for rhythm.
Yeah. And
Uh-huh.
that's what's often missing from traditional music education, which can be, well, all over the place depending on your teacher.
It's like everyone's learning different dialects instead of the core grammar itself.
Exactly.
This is fascinating. So, learning the language of rhythm, understanding it on this deeper level, it's like the key to unlocking a whole new world of musical expression.
That's exactly it. It changes how you listen to music, how you create it, everything.
It makes you wonder how different music education would be if everyone learned this way. Could this be the key to helping those who don't naturally gravitate towards music? Like, could we nurture that musicality in everyone?
That's a really interesting thought. And it goes back to what we were talking about earlier with Lima and his ideas.
About how musicality isn't some magical talent that you're born with, it's something you can learn.
Exactly.
Wow, this deep dive has really changed how I think about music, that's for sure. So, for our listeners who are now just as fascinated by this as I am, where can they find Lima's work?
Well, his book, Dicionário de Ritmo, that's a great starting point.
It's got all the details.
It really lays out all his theories.
Yeah.
And you can find his software on his website, too.
Perfect. And that website again is.
It's www.sdl.com.
And I'm guessing for those who prefer visuals, maybe some videos, there's stuff online too.
Oh, tons. Just search Jack Lima Ritmo.
Perfect. Well, there you have it, folks. Rhythm. It's not just about tapping your foot, it's a whole language unto itself with its own sets of rules and endless possibilities. So next time you're listening to your favorite song, remember that there's a whole world of math and structure behind those beats just waiting to be discovered.